Power. It's the most dangerous drug known to humanity. It's toppled empires, turned saints into monsters, and rewritten history in blood. But what happens when absolute power falls into the hands of someone who was never supposed to have it? What happens when a man who was considered literal property his entire life suddenly finds himself holding the strings of an empire? History is filled with brutal betrayals, but the story of Malik Kafur is an absolute nightmare. This is the tale of a man who climbed from the filth of a slave market to the pinnacle of glory, only to orchestrate one of the most vicious power grabs in history. A slave who became a general, a confidant who became a traitor. This is the story of the 35 days of terror that brought an empire to its knees. He made kings, and then he unmade them, blinding princes and murdering his way to a throne he was never meant to touch. His end was as gruesome as his reign was short, but the central horrifying legend that defines him, the story of him skinning a sultan alive, hides a truth that is far more complex and far more chilling. To understand the monster, first, we have to understand the man and the world that created him. This story doesn't begin in a palace, but in the chaos of conquest. In 1299, the armies of the Delhi Sultanate, led by the ruthless Sultan Alauddin Khilji, tore through the wealthy kingdom of Gujarat. Amidst the plunder, Alauddin's general, Nusrat Khan, found a unique prize in the port city of Kambat, a young Hindu slave of astonishing beauty. He was bought for 1,000 dinars, a massive sum that earned him the nickname Hazar Dinari, the 1,000-dinar man. That slave, ripped from his home, was Malik Kafur. Stripped of his past, his freedom, and his religion, Kafur was converted to Islam and presented as a spoil of war to the Sultan in Delhi. In the cutthroat world of the Sultan's court, a slave was less than nothing, a tool, an ornament, or cannon fodder. But Kafur was different. He had a razor-sharp intellect, a ruthless ambition, and an uncanny knack for navigating deadly court politics. Sultan Alauddin Khilji was a paranoid and brilliant ruler who had murdered his own uncle, who was also his father-in-law, to seize the throne. He trusted no one because he knew loyalty was just a commodity to be bought and sold. Yet, in this young eunuch slave, he saw something different. He saw a reflection of his own ambition. More importantly, he saw someone with no family, no powerful friends, and no power base other than the Sultan himself. In Alauddin's eyes, this made Kafur the one person he could actually trust. This trust was the foundation of Kafur's meteoric rise. He stopped being just a slave and quickly became a confidant, a counselor, and then a commander. The exact nature of their relationship was a subject of whispers throughout the court. Chroniclers like Ziauddin Barani hinted at an intimate homosexual relationship, claiming the Sultan was madly in love with Kafur. Other historians argue this was just political slander, a way for the established nobility to discredit a low-born outsider who was stealing their power and influence. But whether their bond was love, trust, or a complex mix of both, the result was the same. Malik Kafur became the Sultan's shadow, his favorite instrument of power. Alauddin didn't just keep Kafur by his side, he unleashed him. He gave his favorite slave command of the Sultanate's armies, a decision that shocked the military elite. And Kafur proved his master right. He was a military genius. In 1306, he crushed a massive Mongol invasion, something other great empires had failed to do. But his true legacy would be forged in the unconquered south. Starting in 1308, Alauddin sent Kafur on a series of audacious campaigns into the Deccan Plateau, lands overflowing with legendary wealth. He led his armies against ancient, powerful kingdoms, the Yadavas, the Kakatiyas, the Hoysalas, and the Pandyas. One by one, they all fell before him, From the siege of Warangal in 1310, he stripped the kingdom of its treasures, including, or so the legends claim, the Koh-i-Noor diamond. He brought back a river of gold, jewels, elephants and horses, wealth so immense it funded Alauddin's entire empire. By 1313, he was made governor of the key southern territory of Devagiri. The slave from Gujarat was now one of the most powerful men in India, second only to the Sultan himself. He had tasted power, and he found he had an insatiable appetite for it. By 1315, the mighty Alauddin Khilji was a shadow of his former self. His body was failing, and his mind was clouded by paranoia. He'd spent his life eliminating rivals and trusting no one, and in his final days, that isolation became his prison. The court, once held in check by sheer terror of the Sultan, was now a viper's nest of nobles and princes, all just waiting for the old lion to die. Sensing his master's end was near, Malik Kafur was called back from the south to Delhi. He arrived to find the Sultan on his deathbed and the court ready to tear itself apart. Alauddin, deeply distrustful of his own sons, concentrated all executive power into the hands of the one man he believed was utterly dependent on him, Malik Kafur. He was appointed Naib or Viceroy, making him the de facto ruler. Kafur didn't waste a moment. He immediately began using his new power to dismantle any and all threats. His main target was Alp Khan, a powerful noble whose daughters were married to Alauddin's two eldest sons, Khizr Khan and Shadi Khan. Alp Khan represented the old guard who despised Kafur. Kafur dripped poison into the Sultan's ear, spinning tales of conspiracy. He manipulated Alauddin into ordering Alp Khan's execution. With their most powerful ally gone, the princes were defenseless. Kafur then convinced the dying Sultan to have his own heir, Khizr Khan, imprisoned in the fortress of Gwalior. His brother, Shadi Khan, was also thrown into a dungeon. The path to the throne was being cleared, one body at a time. In early January 1316, Sultan Alauddin Khilji died. Some chroniclers whisper that Kafur, seeing his chance, might have helped him along with a bit of poison. We'll never know for sure, but the suspicion has always lingered. The throne was empty. Kafur moved with the speed of a general. The day after the Sultan's death, he gathered the most important men of the court. He didn't make the mistake of trying to claim the throne for himself. He knew the nobility would never accept a former slave as sultan. Instead, he played the part of the loyal servant. He produced a will, supposedly from Alauddin, that disinherited the imprisoned sons. The will named Alauddin's youngest son, a boy of only 5 or 6, named Shihabuddin Omar, as the new sultan. And who would rule for the child? Who would be regent? Why, the most loyal servant of the late king, Malik Kafur. He placed the boy on the throne in a grand ceremony, a puppet king to mask his own absolute authority. The slave hadn't become the sultan. He'd become the kingmaker, a far more powerful position. He now held all the power of the throne, with none of the rules. The stage was set for 35 days of pure terror. With his puppet king on the throne, Malik Kafur's mask of loyalty fell away, revealing the face of a ruthless tyrant. For 35 days, Kafur ruled the Delhi Sultanate as an absolute dictator. Every morning he'd hold court. He'd have the child sultan brought out and displayed to the nobles to keep up the charade, and then immediately send the boy back to his mother. Once that was over, the real business of the day would begin, the bloody consolidation of his power. His first move was to eliminate any remaining threats from Alauddin's family. The late Sultan's eldest sons, Khizr Khan and Shadi Khan, were already in prison. But that wasn't enough. To be a viable claimant to the throne, a prince needed his sight. An order was sent from the regent. Men were dispatched to Gwalior Fort where, as the historian Barani horrifically describes, A razor was drawn across the prince's eyes, blinding them. This act of calculated cruelty was a political death sentence, removing them from the line of succession far more effectively than an execution. With the two eldest sons neutralized, Kafur turned on their mother, stripping her of her wealth and throwing her into prison. But there was one loose end left: Mubarak Shah, Alauddin's third son, a teenager. Kafur had him arrested and gave the order for him to suffer the same fate as his brothers. He too was to be blinded. It seemed the entire Khilji dynasty was about to be extinguished by the very man its patriarch had raised from nothing. The atmosphere in Delhi grew thick with fear. The nobles who had long resented Kafur now watched in horror as he dismantled their world. This wasn't politics, it was a vendetta. It was the retribution of a man who had spent a lifetime in servitude, now unleashing his resentment upon his former masters. Kafur's cruelty was real and terrifying, but it's during this chaotic period that an even more gruesome legend was born, the very story that gives our tale its name: the skinning of a sultan. The horror of Kafur's actions was so profound that it spawned monstrous myths. The story of him flaying a prince alive is the most enduring of these, a tale that has echoed through the centuries. But did it actually happen? Well, if we look at the most reliable sources from the time, men like Ziauddin Barani and Isami, they give us detailed accounts of Kafur's rise, his campaigns, and his brutal 35-day regency. They talk about the blinding of the princes and the executions, but nowhere in these primary historical records is there any mention of Malik Kafur skinning anyone alive, let alone a sultan or a prince. This spectacular act of barbarity seems to be a later fabrication, a legend that grew out of the very real terror he inspired. People were willing to believe he was capable of anything. The legend likely became attached to him because his actions were seen as the ultimate betrayal. He metaphorically skinned the dynasty, stripping it of its power, its honor, and its heirs. So while the story is likely a myth, it's a myth born from a terrible truth. For 35 days, the Delhi Sultanate was in the hands of a man who ruled with breathtaking brutality. A throne built on fear will not last. In his bloody purge, Malik Kafur made one fatal mistake. He had targeted the sons and wives of the late Sultan, but he'd overlooked the one group whose loyalty was not to him but to the memory of their master, Alauddin's personal bodyguards. Known as Paiks, these elite soldiers had served Alauddin faithfully for years. They had stood guard while he slept and owed their lives to him. Now, they watched in silent rage as the upstart slave they once protected systematically destroyed their master's family. They knew it was only a matter of time before the tyrant turned on them too. The breaking point was the order to blind the last adult son, Mubarak Shah. The Paiks sent to do the deed were faced with a choice. As one popular telling of the story goes, the captive prince made a final, desperate plea. He reminded them of their service to his father and warned them that a slave who betrays his master will surely betray his servants next. Then he threw them his jeweled necklace, a bribe to save his life and a down payment for revenge. Whether it was the prince's plea, the bribe, or their own festering anger, we'll never know for sure. But the Paiks made their choice. Led by a man named Mubashir, they turned away from the prince's cell and marched toward the regent's chambers. They decided to kill Kafur on their own. Kafur, ever paranoid, had already grown suspicious a conspiracy was brewing. He summoned Mubashir to his private room, likely to interrogate or kill him. It was a fatal mistake. Mubashir had been allowed to carry weapons in the palace since Alauddin's time, a privilege Kafur hadn't revoked. As he stood before the regent, Mubashir drew his sword and struck the first blow. In that instant, his fellow conspirators burst into the room. They fell upon the wounded regent and, in the very heart of his stolen power, beheaded him. His reign of terror, which had begun with the death of a sultan, ended just 35 days later with his own bloody assassination in February 1316. The slave who had clawed his way to the absolute peak of the empire was struck down by the very bodyguards he commanded. His assassins immediately freed Mubarak Shah and installed him as the new regent. The brief, violent, and terrifying chapter of Malik Kafur was over. The story of Malik Kafur is a chilling look at the seductive nature of power. His rise was extraordinary, a slave who became a celebrated general and, for a fleeting moment, the undisputed master of an empire. Yet, his legacy isn't military genius, it's ultimate betrayal. His 35-day reign of terror did more than just eliminate his rivals. It shattered the foundations of the Khilji dynasty. The chaos he unleashed didn't end with his death. Mubarak Shah, the prince he tried to blind, eventually seized the throne by blinding his own child brother, the puppet Kafur had installed. Mubarak Shah's own reign was a disaster, and just 4 years later, he too was murdered, betrayed by one of his own favorites, a dark echo of his father's fate with Kafur. Soon after, the Khilji dynasty, which had once seemed invincible, collapsed entirely. Malik Kafur, the slave who rose higher than anyone could have imagined, ended up being the architect of his master's ruin. He is remembered as the ultimate traitor, a man whose hunger for power consumed everything and everyone around him, including himself. The legend of him skinning a prince alive may not be literally true, but it serves as a horrifyingly perfect symbol for what he actually did to the empire. He ripped it apart, piece by bloody piece. In the end, his story forces us to ask a timeless question. Does absolute power corrupt, or does it simply reveal the darkness that was already there, just waiting for a chance to get out? Thank you for joining us on this journey into the brutal history of the Delhi Sultanate. If you found this story fascinating, hit that like button, subscribe for more tales of ambition and betrayal, and share this video with anyone who loves a good, dark piece of history. Until next time, stay curious.